Guys, thanks for joining me today.
Our pleasure.
Sure. Dr. Gasberry, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm the research leader for the Bovine Functional Genomics Laboratory, which is a research unit of the Agricultural Research Service of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. My training is in the fields of parasitology and immunology. I've been working on cattle parasites for the past 24 years for the USDA.
What's the most significant impact parasites have on cattle production today?
They suppress appetite in cattle. An easy way to look at that is if you have an infection in gut, the last thing you think about is food, and that's what cattle do. If you look at the image, you'll see an example of a study that was done where cattle were either treated to remove the worms or left untreated. And you can see the animals that were treated on the left are actively grazing, looking for food. You'll see the pasture has been grazed down, while those animals on the right are just standing there and the pasture is long and unkept.
So parasite infection suppresses the appetite. What other impacts will parasite infestation have on health and vaccination program?
They markedly inflame the immune system. And if you look at the image, here's an example of a study that shows that within a couple of weeks of infection, the lymph nodes, which are the target organ for the immune system there in the gut, have increased in mass 20 or 30 fold. This is almost an unbelievable kind of increase of the immune system. The reason for that increase is these parasites have found a way to remain there, and they constantly stimulate the immune system. What happens when you have a toxin or an infection in your intestine? Well, you try to remove it. The most effective way of removing it is simply flushing it out. So you develop a diarrhea. But the overall effect is, rather than becoming what it's supposed to be, an absorptive organ to bring in nutrients and fluids, it's forcing out nutrients and fluids.
So we have reduced feed consumption because of the appetite suppression, and then the consumption that we are getting in is not actually being utilized very well anyway, so it's kind of a double whammy.
The overall effect of that is that the animal is much less inclined or much less equipped to handle other challenges to the immune system, such as other infections of the gut and, importantly, vaccinations.
So by putting together a strategic deworming program, I could not only control the parasites to improve feed intake, to improve gains on the cattle, but I'd also get more out of the money I'm spending for vaccination programs as well. So Dr. Gasberry, we've talked about cattle that have reduced intake and cattle that are going through some health situations, but in a normal herd situation, am I going to see all the problems that are being caused by those parasites?
To think that you can stand and look at your cattle and tell which animals are suffering the most is not very practical. And as such, we refer to the disease often as being subclinical, and that is that we know things are happening, we know the animals aren't on their best balance, but at the same time, it's not easily seen and it takes very precise measurement. So it's important that you treat the disease as a herd disease and not as individuals.
And Dr. Newcomb, we're interested in hearing what impact this will have on the stocker industry, but before we get there, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure, Ron. Well, I've been working for Intervet for the past 5 years, and before that I practiced in Batesville, Mississippi for about 18 years doing cow-calf and stocker work.
And Dr. Gasberry talked about the impact on feed intake and the immunization system if we're heavily parasitized. For the stocker operator, what's that really mean?
Well, the key to success in a stocker operator when he's receiving cattle is to get those calves up eating and eating very quickly. And the thing you have to do is to get the parasites out. So you got to worm them up front with a product that works pretty quick. And then what you're also doing is kind of resetting that immune system. Because as soon as you kill those worms, that immune system starts resetting. So that's important when you think about vaccination and disease prevention.
So resetting the immune system, what do you really mean by that?
Well, what you're doing is you're starting that down regulation. You're starting those lymph nodes coming back into normal so those animals can respond better to vaccines.
Well, Dr. Stromberg, we also want to know what impact parasites have on the health and well-being of our cow-calf operators. But before we get into that, it'd only be fair to have you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a professor of parasitology at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. I've been doing that for the past 29 years, and I was 6 years before that at the University of Pennsylvania.
So you're certainly qualified to share with us some thoughts and impact on what parasites do to the cow-calf operator.
We've had some interesting results that way. Very much like Dr. Gasbury mentioned, any animal that eats well performs better. I very often have cattlemen who call me up and say, you know, Doc, I don't need to deworm this year. I've got plenty of pasture and I'm going to feed them through parasitism. Well, we've just heard that that doesn't work. We know that if we treat for parasites and control parasites, we have a significant impact on weaning weights. On a study that we ran, we found a 41-pound weaning weight advantage. But even more than that, it has a significant impact on reproductive performance. We ended up with 94% of the cows pregnant in the treated group, the animals treated with an anthelminthic, and only 82% were pregnant.
So a 12% increase in
advantage.
conception rates for those cows that we deworm versus those cows we just let get rough it on through.
Right. So as opposed to culling them at the end of the grazing season, we end up having 12 more calves.
Yeah.
And then when you start to multiply that by any number of animals you have in the herd, becomes quite significant.
Pays for the cost of a strategic deworming program pretty quick.
Very easily. The other thing that we found, and that was a study that we did in Missouri, we actually found that these cows milk better. We did a weigh-suckle weigh experiment where we ended up finding that Angus cows milked 1.5 pounds better with being parasite-free.
Okay.
So there's an impact there as well.